Welcome to everyone who is here, and thank you for joining us. My name is Trish Feth, and I'm the Communication and Program Specialist with the Northern Virginia Soil and Water Conservation District. And helping me today is Grace Murdoch, who is our Education Specialist. Thank you very much, Grace. Let me get to introducing our speaker this morning. With us this morning is Matt Gerhart. He is the Conservation Director for the Northern Virginia Conservation Trust. Matt joined NVCT in 2019 after serving as San Francisco Bay Area Program Manager for the California State Coastal Conservancy, where he led a multi-million-dollar program to protect natural resources, improve public access, enhance climate resiliency, and conserve the Bay Area's working lands. Matt also previously worked with the Mendocino Land Trust and as a conservation planner and researcher working on urban and rural conservation projects throughout Northern California. And you're here now from all of that fun work in California.
Yeah,
Matt holds, that might need some explanation. Matt holds a master's degree in geography from the University of California at Berkeley and a bachelor's degree from Yale University. Without further ado, Matt, thank you for joining us, and the floor is yours, as they say.
Yeah, thanks again. Thanks for having me. And everyone, thanks for taking your Saturday morning and sitting on Zoom. I think we were talking right before this how these are and are sometimes in person, and I appreciate folks being able to come out and at least, I hope you have I have my coffee right here, so hopefully you'll have some yourself. So anyhow, I appreciate that as a way to kick things off. We have been doing a few rounds on some work we've been doing at Northern Virginia Conservation Trust and got in touch about potentially giving a presentation here. And what I want to do with this today is hopefully just give you a taste of some of the work that we're doing as a conservation group and let folks kind of think about how planning for protecting valuable natural resources can be done sort of across any number of organizations in terms of, people who both do it like I do all day long, but folks who want to support it in different ways too. I'm going to start sharing a screen. Give me a little heads up if that's working for folks.
It looks good.
All right. Looks good. Great. So this is a little title for today. Just as as background, I've been now with the Land Trust for 5 years and stepped in as our program director, having lived in California for many years, moved out here for family reasons. At any event, have moved over to Northern Virginia Conservation Trust, which some of you may know. And if you don't, I wanted to spend a little time just kind of giving a sense of what we do and some of our background. So NVCT is a regional land trust, and I'll describe land trusts for a second if you don't know much about them. And we're a 501c3 nonprofit with a mission to permanently protect land for future generations. And the way we do that is what I'll be getting into in a lot of detail here. But essentially, we're working with private landowners, other types of entities, public organizations as well, to either buy and protect forever or use private mechanisms to conserve land. We were founded in 1994, so we just celebrated our 30th anniversary, and we're not a terribly huge organization. We have nine and a half staff, FTEs. We have a couple interns and our core staff who help do everything we do. So I work with a team of 5 folks who do the land protection. We have some folks who do new projects as they come in, and we have folks who do our stewardship work, which is going and meeting with all the landowners that we work with. One thing I always like to highlight is the little symbol in the corner there is our accreditation symbol, and we're an accredited land trust. So to kind of talk a little bit about what land trusts do. There's several thousand land trusts now at this point across the country. Some of them are huge organizations, like you would know, the Nature Conservancy, Trust for Public Land. But many, many of them are small, very local in many cases, organizations formed by citizens to do protection of the things they care about. And we're sort of in the mid-range in terms of ones that work regionally. There's several dozen land trusts that work across Virginia as a whole, some of whom are a little bigger than us, a number of which are somewhat smaller. We're the main land trust that works in Northern Virginia proper, but you all may run into land trusts like Land Trust of Virginia, which works statewide. There's also Piedmont Environmental Council that works in areas, and the Potomac Conservancy, others like that. Just a little bit about who we are and what we do here is we have one of the things that has happened as an organization has grown up is we've expanded. So we actually began in Fairfax County as Fairfax County Preservation Land Trust, and eventually added all of the Beltway areas, and now moved all the way down through Spotsylvania County and over to Loudoun. And you can see in sort of those blue dots where our projects are, where we've conserved land. Since 1994, we've conserved over 9,000 acres of land across the region. We have about 140 of the properties that we've worked with are what I'll talk about conservation easement properties. And then we have about 35, 40 small preserves that we own and manage ourselves. We have a few of those that are publicly accessible and you can go out and walk on yourself, but we have a very light touch sort of public access footprint. A lot of our more significant public properties are actually the ones with easements on them. We've got easements on public parks and other places you may know, though you might not know that we're involved always because we're sort of in the background. This slide also helps you understand how challenging the problem of understanding what we want to try to accomplish and what we want to preserve is for Northern Virginia. It is truly a massive area. And again, we're only looking, when we talk about Virginia, we're only looking at half of a giant metro area, which also extends up through Maryland as well. But trying to deal with all of the issues around a metropolitan area and its growth, you can imagine that it's very, very different working in different parts of this service area. And so just to say a few things about these tools. So one thing we do is buy and own land, like I said. Sometimes that's just to transfer it over to a public agency who's more of a park manager. A lot of the time it is not, though, a suitable thing for the land to actually go into public ownership. And again, I didn't show the statistics of how much is public on that map, but it's about 20%, 22% of our region is already conserved in some fashion. A large amount of that is through either federal or state land. And, it's not all going to be protected through the public, right? Private landowners are the main stewards of our natural resources, broadly in the country, but even in a major urban region like ours. So what we use as a group, the land trust community, largely are what are called conservation easements. You see some of the characteristics there in terms of what they are. They're a legal agreement recorded against the property that restricts its uses in perpetuity. And the cool thing about a conservation easement is it's the landowner's choice. It's a voluntary gift or a purchase in some cases, but it's the landowner crafts that document with the land trust, and the land trust accepts the responsibility of protecting that property in perpetuity based on whatever its main characteristics are and the areas that deserve that protection. Because of that relationship we're building with these easements, it actually is considered a public benefit trust of sorts, and landowners are available to take advantage of certain types of benefits to help kind of compensate for essentially what they're giving up, which is the future developability of their land. Kind of some flavor there with conservation easements. They have been used throughout the state, and they are very well used in sort of the what you can see in Loudoun and Fauquier, some of the more rural areas around us, but have not been able to be used a ton within sort of the core of Northern Virginia. That's another challenge. Where has it been feasible, and where are we trying to continue to make it feasible? What you do with a conservation easement, what does it actually say? It often limits the ability to subdivide the land. It limits future development in certain ways. People often retain a right for, say, a home or agricultural uses. but we won't allow for essentially conversion of the landscape. Not allowed to mine. We will always look for and protect specific resources like wetlands, streams, rare habitats. We look for scenic areas, and we do that through areas that we call building envelopes. So we set aside the spots that are suitable for future, light development. What we're looking for when we do that, it's kind of all of the above from a conservation standpoint. We were formed as a very broad-based land trust. There are trusts that are very issue-specific that only look for that only work on trees, that only work on rare habitat, that do historic preservation. We can accept easements that are the purpose of which are multi-purpose. So that's essentially what we are looking for typically: nature, scenery, history, culture, but it all has to come together in a way to make the property, sum up to something worth protecting in perpetuity. So with that, I would, pause and say, hey, questions about land trusts, and you should certainly just throw in any questions you have about land trusts in general. What, though, are we trying to do when we're trying to map the conservation priorities for this region? We're really trying to make our criteria work better for our purposes. And as I said, we had pretty broad purposes. And this is maybe going back 5 or 6 years in the land trust trajectory. There was an effort to try to say, how can we be more strategic in what we're doing? And I use this slide as a way to illustrate that we've never not had selection criteria, not had a goal of what we're trying to do, but we've had essentially a very large target, a very big bullseye. We can kind of look at lots of things and say, that's great. So our process was to say, how could we use technology? How could we use mapping, research, and other tools to sort of enhance our ability to focus in on the most critical places and use our limited resources where we can. And in doing that, we kind of created a process and a project that has, I think, lifted up some of these areas just in general, right? We've looked at the issue very generically through our lenses, and I think we'll talk about it later, but created some resources that hopefully others can use for their own purposes too. So here, though, are the center of this little bullseye, the center of this area where things overlap is really what we were hoping to pull out. So what we did is we launched into some data, and we did that through some grants that we got. I'll describe a couple pilots, a pilot that we did, and then the full project. But, as you do these things, I've done several rounds of different levels of conservation analysis throughout my career. And you always have to kind of pause and think, because if you don't ask the right questions, you get the wrong answers. So what we use, or in general in the field, is we use GIS, ArcGIS, products to take spatial information, map them to the ground, and then do different kinds of analysis. In our case, we're actually going down to look at the properties themselves, the parcels that people own. You can do it in more sketch fashion. You can do it with hexagons, other ways. But since when we have to talk to somebody, we're talking about their property, we needed to get the information ideally down to that scale. There's a lot of challenges with making that work. And then just saying generically, it's really important, to know that how you define your criteria and how you define what you're looking to put into a model will totally affect what you get out and how useful it is. So the brunt of all the work is in the mulling it over. There are some really interesting and important examples of some conservation prioritizations for our region, and I'm calling the region NOVA, but it's, we've got 2 essentially large-scale regional commissions that operate in this area. We've got NVRC, and we have to the south GWRC, George Washington Regional Commission, Northern Virginia Regional Commission. Those are our sort of council of governments organizations that each have looked at green infrastructure or habitat connectivity. On the left is a plan we helped work with GWRC on in sort of the 2016-17 era. That's their strategy, very detailed from a GIS standpoint, some core habitats, lots of connectivity areas in that effort. Kind of two things pulled out there. On the right is an older strategy, which is sort of what our core area relies on, and that is NBRC's work that was much more kind of sketch, if you will, in terms of large scale corridors, and didn't really get into details of where you would do that. So I'll come back to this a little later because I think this is relevant to sort of how do you pick what you're actually going to focus on. We worked ahead and originally worked with a water utility to get some funding to look at the Occoquan watershed. That's Fairfax Water, as most of us get our tap water from. They're obviously more concerned with water quality, and this was again 3 or 4 years ago, worked with them to develop an initial framework that gave us some focal areas in and around the Occoquan Reservoir. So I've been working on that as a sort of base framework. We then went out and worked with our Council of Land Trusts, essentially, the Land Trust Alliance, and received some climate-related money to do a much more detailed and in-depth analysis. Having done it for the Occoquan was great, and we had sort of a guidebook a little bit for that area. But the questions prompted sort of everywhere you go, what would be the best thing to conserve? And again, in a very diverse landscape, that's challenging. What this slide is trying to show, it's not showing it well. It's got too much, text on it, too many little issues. But what it's trying to show is how we worked. We worked with a consulting firm with the grant we got, a team called Biohabitats, who's based out of Baltimore. They do great work. And how we conceptualized how to put the different elements of this together. So we did what was called a regional conservation scoring. I'm going to skip over this very quickly because we'll go through it in a little more detail. But we decided that we'd have to segment the region into different sorts of characteristics and then sort of reassemble it all to look at where our priorities should fall. And what does that mean? We started with all the lovely layers that people do often when they do these GIS analyses. But to say how that should work, we went back to our core criteria. So we have sort of different elements of what we look at when we're looking at properties. How will it benefit the watershed? What kinds of rare habitats does it have? Those scenic characteristics. And we went through and we looked at everything we typically want to know, and we said, what can we map? And the consultants helped us find layers and find the right types of layers that would inform what we might say about a particular property. So we looked at things like distance to protected lands. How close is it, or how well does it connect to other protected areas? That's a key thing we look at. We looked at a whole range of natural system, habitat-related layers, a whole range of watershed-related layers. And then we kind of fit in where we could other things like agriculture, forestry, where we do have good scenic area or historic area mapping, which is actually pretty poorly mapped in many cases. We threw those in. We also have some products that look at threat, what's at risk of being developed, and we factored that in as well. Other types of sort of logistical challenges. So we got this big soup of these layers and did some scoring. And I love to just throw up a map like this because it's just such a mess and the colors are so gaudy. And so sort of imagine one day you show up and this is what you're given and you're like, okay, what do you do with that? But it was actually a pretty cool day to see, hey, all this work, we worked on the details of how you score each parcel, how you add it up. And one day you get it and you see this sort of layer cake. And this was the original sort of summing of all the values in the region. One of the things we were really looking into was whether we would have values across the region, because in our experience, we can go work. We do work on some we've conserved properties as small as 1/10 of an acre in Arlington or Alexandria. We've conserved 500-acre properties out in farm country. So we have a challenge with we kind of know it when we see it, but you can't just pick a number and say X acres is good, Y acres is bad. And we needed this model to work both in a tight urban space or in a more rural setting, and a lot of suburban settings, as you know, like a lot of rapidly developing settings. So what we were looking at was, did it find the right things? Did it find connectivity? The grays in these maps are the areas that are already protected in one way. That's either publicly owned or conserved with an easement, either ours or other organizations. And the higher in these maps, the blue is the sort of highest ranking, are they kind of knitting together a landscape from all of these little individual chunks? And in general, it was working well. We spent almost a year tweaking things to make it work better, but you can see even in this map, some of the more developed areas, the subdivided, really intensely, suburban communities are in the red, and the blue larger landscapes are off where there is some space. The reality in our area is that this is very, very intricately interspersed. If you drive around, you'll notice like everything is kind of right next to each other in a basically a spider web. The other issue, though, was we actually would have lost the center of the region because you can't really just look at wetlands or forest and end up, apples to apples with these various areas. So we were talking about how do we let things shine for what they are. And we looked at these, what we called themes in the end, different types of properties that shared some characteristics. So particularly things that relate to the urban core that people relate to. So is it in an urbanized area? Is it a socially vulnerable landscape? We looked at urban heat islands. We looked at where are people missing the opportunity, relatively have fewer parks. And each of these themes, for those areas, we would let the model compare against one another. So it was sort of saying, within our urban areas, how do these parcels do? Within socially vulnerable areas, how do these parcels do? And in each case, the goal was to go pick out the best of the bunch and allow those to kind of rise up. And so that was kind of the secret to the success in the end, in why we ended up with something for everyone, in a sense. It's hard to see, but even in they are very small parcels, but they're intricately connected, even in where we're sitting today. And my office is in Annandale. How we did it, again, I'm not reading any of the details of what the breaks are and all these things. If you guys have technical questions, you can ask. But essentially, we let the top couple tiers of a 10-tier, we had sort of buckets of 1 to 10, 0 to 100, and we took the top, cream of the crop, and we used that layer, and we said, okay, now let's start to define sort of what we mean. And now going back to this, you really start scratching your head, because you could see that sort of in the GWRC example down south, they included a lot. It's hard to look at that map and not see green somewhere. It's pretty much all green. In our case, that's not going to help, because we needed something more refined than that. And we really needed something that would allow us to just say, hey, when and if we want to go work in this area, we can dive in deeper. On the right side, looking back at NDRC's project, well, a lot of good stuff is not included on that map. It's a great map in terms of sort of highlighting what they called it, the regional opportunities, the areas where you could really make a large scale difference over time. But it's not really going to help you call individual landowners. It's just too generic. So we worked for quite a long time with some teams that we pulled together. We met with different of our partners. Internally, we worked with our board, and we sort of sketched out what we were seeing with the data. And I would say in any planning exercise, that's the part that matters. The hard work that goes on with all the data crunching is great. It's kind of fun, but it's not until you start sitting down and saying to people, what does that mean? Or what do you think of this? What do you see? That you really start to talk about what it is that matters in the end. So what you do see in this, when we do this, is what's the answer, right? Is a lot of connectivity, especially in our area here, around our stream valley corridors, around water resources. And somebody might say, well, you kind of have all these layers and they all relate to water in some way, right? And that's, you could have known that from the beginning, but not quite. I mean, the real answer is that what we're dealing with in many of our areas are what's left over. And in a sense, what we've already conserved are largely our water resources in the areas that are undevelopable near them. And a lot of areas have been taken out of the equation with that development. And so when you say to a model in this case, hey, connect up what you can, it's going to use the available resources. And so we do have some sort of broad-based areas that we picked out that are more landscape oriented. You can see sort of a chunk out here in Western Fairfax, but a lot of the areas we identified are essentially building out somewhat existing stream corridors. for that part of the region. As you get farther out into farm country, it becomes more about agricultural landscapes. It becomes more about large-scale forest patches. But and so that was the dream, was that it could be different things in different part of the region. And I think it did work out. How does that look in the end? You know, you go through all this work. We worked with some folks to do some visualizations. We created some maps, and now we have a sort of neat internal tool that can really get us down into the details and shows these areas in all their glory. And I can talk to people about individual properties based on that mapping. But we also have some things that we can share out more generally, and hopefully have conversations, you know, sort of either region-wide or in smaller settings about like why places matter and what it really takes to conserve them. So that was kind of this is a 2-3 year effort, but that's sort of where we landed. And you know, with that's what I was going to start with, and happy to answer questions or go down rabbit holes with people.
That was great. Thank you, Matt.
Sure.
I thought I saw a question or two in the chat. Sandy,
There's one. Sorry, do you want to go, Trish?
Okay, Sandy asked, how are board members selected?
How are
yeah,
NVCT's board members selected?
I assume so.
Yeah, great question. Well, they're selected by our board, and we actually have a need for board members at the moment. We do that through connections, you know, word of mouth. But actually, more recently, the board has actually been putting out an announcement. So there's actually like a job description and an announcement that people can respond to and send in their interests. And we range from about a dozen to up to 18 board members at any given time. And yeah, if you're interested, reach out.
Thank you. If just as far as process, if you want to hit the raise hand button at the top of your screen, that way we can just call on people in order to ask questions. I think that'll work. And then we'll also check the chat for questions. Willie, our executive director, has his hand raised. Go ahead, Mr. Wood.
Oh, Mr. Wood, thank you. Good morning, Matt. How are you?
Hi, good morning. Oh, Willie, you went on mute by accident.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that.
There you are. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I said thank you for your presentation. With special interest, I noticed the slide in which you had the target and one of the options of things that you can do within your lands in the Conservation Trust is agriculture.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering if within that ball of agricultural options, you have opportunity for urban agriculture. Urban agriculture is a trend that's picking up very much, is of great relevance these days, especially in Fairfax and some of the Prince William Loudoun County areas, in order to fight things like food deserts and stuff. So I wonder if you have plans to open up some of those unrestricted trust areas to the public to develop community gardens or individual gardens or gardens that would work towards funding food banks, which, as I said, I see as being very important in our area today.
Thanks. Yeah, I think yes. The answer is we're very interested in that, and it is a challenge. I think when you look at when you talk about this mapping, right? You look at prime agricultural soils and these characteristics that sort of are very generic about a whole area, right? And so when you're, you know, out in Western Loudoun, that's a lot of very big open properties that have had a history of agriculture. And when you're talking in a more urban context about smaller spaces, you know, we got a couple issues that were sort of, they're in the mix and they definitely come out in this analysis, but are you going to even have the room to do it, right, is one. So that all the relationships with developability and is it going to get taken offline, like we can't do it if we don't have the space in the first place. So lots of properties that are out there potentially conservable could potentially be related to ag. Most of them are not in ag, as you know, right? Like they're not right now being taken advantage of them. And a lot of places have actually kind of gone beyond fallow, right? Like they're either recovering forests or they are weedy messes or old beat up lots. And so one of the tricks, right, is not just identifying it, which is what this tool can help do, but it's then what are you going to do? Because most of the land would take a lot of work, right, to then dive in and get productive ag back in. So we're really happy to be part of the, like, how can we find the best places for this equation? And then you're alluding to some of the networking and the group of people who we need available to jump on and do the work. And I'm super interested in that side too. We are fairly far into, for us, this has been mostly happening in Arlington, but we about 2.5-3 years ago were bequested a small parcel, a third of an acre, and a big chunk of it is forest, and it went to the county. We worked with the county to get it into their park system. But another chunk, it was had been residential, but it was a lovely set of gardens at one point, but completely, you couldn't even, well, the first times we went on, nobody even knew there had been these gardens. They were just, it was just a weedy mess. And when we were discussing what to do with it, how to even manage it once we owned it, we thought of maybe a small pocket park. We thought of, a trail through the area to get down to the creek that's nearby. But the idea came out, like, could we do urban ag again? And it turned out there are these terraced southern facing slope, beds, all sort of hidden in the landscape. And we are partnering with Friends of Urban Agriculture in Arlington to kind of reinvigorate that, make it live. We've gotten water on site. We've been doing lots of cleanups. And they're invested in getting on the property and actually getting food off. And they work through a program they have called Plot Against Hunger, which I love the title of, which is getting food into the food bank stream, fresh food from places they've grown it. So I think that's to say, yes, the tools, we can find properties, we want to find properties, but there's so many elements, right, that go into it next. And I think it's a very profitable place that we can all be working.
Thank you. That's a good answer. And I just want to remind you that I believe that organizations like yours and ours can really achieve bigger goals by partnering together. And one of our focus of the district is to expand our footprint in urban agriculture. And if we work together, probably with other organizations, well, we may be able to get over some of the humps or some of the obstacles that may make the work difficult for just you alone. So maybe we can, in some other discussion, we can talk about the future of us partnering in that direction.
Absolutely. It's 100% partnership, and I welcome that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great. That's great. Let's take Whitney's question. She has her hand raised. And then Grace, I'm going to ask you to get some ready from the chat because there are quite a few after we go with Whitney. Whitney, you can unmute and ask your question.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, Matt. I'm with Friends of Homes Run. So I'm always taking a watershed approach to, I love to hear what you just said about, like stream valleys. And of course, I'm on the ground, like trying to convince neighbors that they need to do more things in their backyards. It's hard for them to see the forest for the trees, pun intended. So I'm looking for fodder here. So like, I'm going to ask you 3 questions. You can answer whichever one you want. But
Great.
What are the reasons that people conserve within urbanized, stream valley areas in Fairfax County? Is it just the choir of people who are already initiated to the environment and how important that is, or is there a range of reasons? Have you been working with HOAs at all? And pools, community pools? Because often they were built right on the waterway, because back in the 50s it was unbuildable land. Therefore, let's put a pool in and then let the chlorine out into the stream. But anyway, and then what arguments do you think are most persuasive when I'm, just doing general, blah, blah, blah with people about, how important it is to be a buffer to the buffer, which are the Stream Valley RPAs. Thanks.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Those are all great questions. Starting with the last one, I think as sort of one of the key things I would want this presentation to people to think about as they leave a presentation like this. Great, there's some data out there, but anytime we can talk about what matters, like why do these landscapes matter? Why do these places matter? It is that conversation that changes people's perspective. So a lot of people who, especially, one thing I didn't mention is the amount of property turnover we have, right? It's a very, very vibrant region, which is great, but it means that a lot of properties are not long-term ownerships. People don't necessarily have those connections to their backyards even. And we get a lot of, I'm scared of ticks and snakes. I can't keep these trees. Like that tree could drop. We all went through those storms recently, and we've had several people, freaking out about about lovely, wonderful trees. So I think that actually any chance you get to get somebody engaged in something that resonates with them about the landscape, whether that's the bird they saw or a cool turtle, or they just loved a quiet moment. I mean, you finding those connection points is how you can open up a conversation about what matters about managing the land. Because in the end, land use and legal agreements and all these things they're not going to change anybody's mind, right? I mean, we have a piece of paper called a conservation easement, and I can go to a landowner, and I will if I have to say, you must do it this way. But I guarantee you that is not the way we want to do it. We always need a relationship. And so that's the key answer there. And getting people together and letting them talk helps too, especially at the scale of a stream or a specific watershed. On HOAs and those challenges, yeah, we work with HOAs a lot. We actually have probably several dozen easements with HOAs. I will take to another conversation or a beer with you all the challenges of working with HOAs, which it's a very challenging environment, even just to get information flow. But it can be a powerful way to manage if again, there's consensus and there's some internal will. But in terms of that incentive side, it is hard on some of the stream valleys. A lot of it is regulated to a degree, and financial incentives do make a big difference as to whether people are willing to do this, is the short answer to that question.
Grace, do you have anything from the chat you've been monitoring that we haven't answered, that Matt hasn't answered yet?
Yes. So someone put a question in the chat and then it disappeared. I don't know if they left or, but they were wondering if and how regional groups work together towards larger conservation goals. And then there was a couple questions about, like, can people see these maps and these GIS layers anywhere? Like, are they posted to social media, or do you have this information publicly available? It looks like a lot of people are interested in seeing sort of how this data affects where they live, and what high priority conservation areas are nearby.
Yeah. So on the first question, yes, we do work together as land trusts. And amongst the ones that are sort of broader national scale groups, we kind of work up with some of them, the Conservation Fund and Trust for Public Land, for example. In our core area, there aren't any other real land trusts that are active. But as I said, I mentioned sort of throughout the region, there's, and I didn't even mention Virginia Outdoor Foundation, who works statewide as well. There's a really robust network of folks, and we have a group called VAULT, which is the Virginia United Land Trusts, and we all meet. We have a conference, a lot of information flow. Where needed, we can collaborate and co-fundraise and things like that. But we haven't necessarily always done that because everyone's got too much work to do. So if we can get together, yeah, we will. I'd say more importantly, we do try to get together with government, right? And working with Willie and working with the forestry departments, working with the parks and rec departments. I work with FCPA. We are trying to make sure that we're leveraging resources in their direction, because if it's not aligned with public decision making, we're all kind of left holding the bag. And they're concerned about maintenance on their own property. So if we come saying, hey, here's a great opportunity, you should do it, we need to know that what are the challenges going to be. We're all dealing with invasives and maintenance costs and things like that. So that's a key aspect of whether, I didn't even mention it in terms of how do we select a project. The mapping can't tell you, or is it going to be financially feasible, or is there the right kind of partnership? But those are key elements of when we take on a project. On the maps, so this is because of it being down to the scale of people's land and the kind of private nature of the way we work. We have to work in a pretty one-on-one confidential way, because for a landowner to do this is a really personal decision. So we don't make these maps available online. I am able to share this information with certain groups, and I have done that. And there's actually groups doing some of their own analysis. And so I'm happy to share with partners who sort of will respect the confidentiality, but we're not making it just like go up, click around. And then in addition, I mentioned we can create maps and we can go to meetings and we can show sort of the right scale of information in a group setting. So we have used once or twice now, it's still pretty new, but yeah, we've created some custom resources to be able to sit down with in an area with folks and really talk more locally. And that is definitely a goal for how we would use the stuff moving forward.
Harley Grimes had asked that question specifically about the layers that you use with your mapping, and was interested in specific information in Prince William County. And I know he is involved in organizations there. So is that an example? Like Charlie, perhaps if you wanted to, I'm not sure that answered your question. But could he reach out individually for more information?
Yeah, people can definitely reach out. And then in terms of I should say, in terms of the way it was done and the data layers that went into it, which again, I didn't clarify too much, but we weren't able to create a lot of like super specific to us information. We had to use what's already available and what's regionally available. It had to have consistency enough around the region. So these are all layers that I can share, where the source came from and get you that information, or it's probably available already online. But yeah, I'm happy to help people. If you've got a specific issue and you're like, how did you look at forest buffer patch size? Yeah, shoot me an email.
Exactly what I was wondering. I'm sorry if there's some of them that you've answered partially. I want to make sure I don't miss any. And people are welcome to raise their hand and ask if Grace and I miss any. There was a question about how do you handle invasive plant? Do you partner with anybody on invasive plant removal, which I don't think that is in your wheelhouse, but what about invasive plants, which are now pretty much a problem everywhere, Stream Valley corridors that you were talking about trying to preserve? What's the deal?
Well, it's very much in our wheelhouse because we have to, right? Just like everyone. I would say, yeah, we're not able to necessarily go to private parties and just deal with your invasives. So that's true. We have to be part of partnerships that do that. We can definitely help landowners with resources that are available, connecting you with some source of technical expertise. Unfortunately, we're, as a community, super short on funding to really tackle these problems. And every manager is too. Park Service, all of us are under-resourced for that. There's a few partners in the region who've developed or been able to get some grant funding, and we do the same thing. So we try to get money and to do treatments on our own properties. Occasionally we'll be able to work with one of our easement landowners to help them. But I don't know what to say hardly. It's like we can have a 2-hour session just on invasives challenges. And it's yeoman labor, and you really are trying to take the best of what you have and what your capacity is and focus it and really, not lose the battle just by getting too scattered. So in every site, we have to just really focus in on what can we manage here. Is that bamboo patch? Is it this new invader? And we work as best we can. But that's going to be the same answer for any of the land managers, around here right now. We need much, much more robust funding to deal with invasives.
Beth has her hand raised. Would you like to unmute and ask your question, Beth?
Sure. Thank you. This has been very informative. I had a question. I don't know if you're familiar with Talamy's book, Nature's Best Hope. And the strategy of how individual landowners, that we can't preserve conservation and biodiversity with just protecting land, that it's important in terms of our own yards to try and restore native plants, pollinator gardens, things like that. And I know, he's a professor out of Delaware, and he's been working with garden clubs and other groups. And like my neighborhood in Fairfax County, there's a number of people, because 20 years ago, we used to see, for example, a lot of monarchs. We don't see them anymore, and trying to plant more milkweed and just native species, part of our yards. So I was wondering how that fits in thinking about your long-term conservation strategy and, the role that individuals can play in terms of not just maybe doing conservation easements on their property, but others who, may have smaller properties where they can't do that, and thinking about what they can do to help in the overall strategy.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, absolutely part of the mentality that I think we try to bring to every conversation if we can. It's not so, again, I don't want it to be out of legal agreement at any point, but what can you on your property be doing to enhance what it offers, right, to us all? And we're not resourced to have a big built out program around a lot of those more enhancements to the properties. And one of the liabilities to conservation easements is they are a thou shalt not. They're a negative servitude. They tell landowners what they shouldn't be doing, right? So don't build, don't destroy. But the trick to doing them well is making sure that that's about the setting the stage, preserving the stage on which nature can flourish. And then it's still up to all of us to make that happen, right? We have to be doing our individual actions. And that's on these private landowners. That's on them. And some of them do incredible work to take out their own invasives, even become showpieces of natural area management. So I'm wholeheartedly, we're trying to promote that. We don't have ourselves a vehicle, but we do partner. I would highlight, folks doing the Audubon at Home program, so Northern Virginia Bird Alliance, just many folks working with the soil and water districts throughout the state on different kinds of best practices, and even funding that's available to implement those best practices. Those are the kinds of things we're trying to point people to when we get on their properties. And yeah, the sort of the theme of us investing locally is really that's what I'm bought into as the solution.
That's great. Hopefully people know about our cost share program for best management practices to deal with stormwater issues on your property, but we do have conservation landscaping and rain gardens as solutions that are sometimes eligible for cost share funds.
And it's always going to be an ongoing process. So it's one in which, like, a permanent conservation easement only does so much, right? Working with other programs really can enhance what you've got.
People were asking about a way to look up easements. You mentioned that you guys are hard to see sometimes behind the scenes. You wouldn't know when you're looking at a protected area out and about. And someone did drop a map in the chat of Fairfax County easements, but then there was a comment that it's an older, out of date map. So what's is that always, that's what we got?
It's a lot harder than you would think. It's a lot harder than you would think to get a good map. And I would say I just grade out the quote protected areas as that's job done, right? But the reality is we worked for months on a variety of sources to find what's best. And so that actually, yeah, Fairfax, I was in a conversation last week with Fairfax. They don't have those are their own easements, and they don't necessarily have a really great public viewer of that. But I will, even if I can get there before this ends, I will find they do now have what they consider their live viewer of that layer. So I'll look for that. Each county, that's a good way of saying a lot of this is based in each county. When it comes to conservation easements and the work we do, the best resource is a mapping tool that I will just try to say, and we can follow up with the links if that's something you all can help with. It's hosted by the Department of Conservation and Recreation. It's the Virginia Natural Heritage Data Explorer. or Vandy, people call it. And it's a public website, and you can go on there, and they have a layer called, they have a lot of good information, and actually a number of our layers that we used in our analysis come from their statewide layers that are available there. Lots of good habitat related, and watershed related stuff. One of them is called Managed Conservation Lands. And so that's the state's repository of all conservation interests. And we're all kind of teamed up in reporting all of our easements to DCR every month so that they get those mapped as best they can. So that's kind of the best source for what's, quote, what's conserved around the state.
Great.
That said, it misses a lot. And when you get into the level of a county, there's a lot more details that aren't on those broader scale maps.
I had the hand up and then it disappeared. Let me just check the chat here. I know that there were, there were a few questions about you approaching homeowners versus homeowners coming to you. Do you get people coming and say, I'd like to put
Yeah, that's a great, I should have even said, so that was a large part of the impetus here too, is to say, in fact, that's the history of the land trust is essentially looking for opportunities, putting the word out and hearing who's interested. But it's been, of all land trusts, they tend to be very opportunistic. Where is there the possibility? And that's the way it works, right? A lot of word of mouth. Now, this effort in many ways is to try to additionally allow us to not just respond to inquiries, people come to us or say, hey, I know a guy who owns a property over there you should look at. But to really look into some zones and say, who should we be talking to, and start the outreach process of getting to know people that we don't already know through our networks. So it's kind of both and is the goal, is that we do both proactive outreach, targeting folks, and we also just listen to what the community is interested in. I see somebody did pull up, the name of the Heritage Explorer.
And I was going to say I can add it to our mailing when we have the recording of this session edited and ready to go. We will post it on our website, but also I will send it out through the listserv, and you are probably on the listserv if you're here. But if not, you can sign up for the Green Breakfast listserv through our website, and I can put the links that we've talked about in that email as well. Oh, there we go. Somebody beat me to it. Thank you for doing my job.
I did find Fairfax's thing real quick. So they call it their Planning and Development Explorer. And buried in there is the current version of that easements layer that somebody was putting in the chat.
Great. That is possible. That is restricted.
Well, so on that point, yes, you can't get directed access to what they call their element occurrences. So DCR does more detailed mapping of where rare plant species and animal species have been recorded. They keep that in-house, but you are in that viewer seeing the summary, the information that they can show about generically where things are on the landscape. And I believe you can always reach out to DCR if you're a watershed group, or there are botanists who will come and work with you on properties and help you understand what's there. They're hard to get a hold of, but they are there, and we've had them out on some of the properties we're working on.
Let me put the call out for final questions for Matt. If you have anything to ask Matt before we wrap up, or if we didn't get to your question in the chat, and I apologize, go ahead and unmute and ask away. And if not, we will let everyone get on with their Saturdays.
I always have extra questions. May I?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm curious about over time. Now, you've been at this for a while, and I'm sure you become more well-known because of that. But in general, do you think that more people are catching on, people who are not already the choir, like all of us? But, are you finding, I mean, I know the invasives make the job harder, and, fragmentation and urbanization, but what kind of positive notes do you see in terms of the dealings you have with the public and with landowners, and what has there been an evolution of what they care about and what they're, thinking about?
Yeah, I think, thanks. I mean, that's a great place to end, especially to hopefully all walk out and have a great weekend, right? Outdoors doing whatever we like to do. And I think we all struggle a little bit with the talking in a sealed room to the folks who are just like us. So I will say that that's a good part of what we try to do, is get out and just talk to anybody about what they're dealing with. And when they come on and have bought a property that they don't really get why it's conserved, that's a huge lift. It can be really hard to bring people along. What do I see? Like I come back to the fact that people who take the time and pause notice. They notice, and they notice something, whether it's the thing you might think they would notice or not. And if nature is one of those things that it really does run a thread through everybody at some point or in some way. So when people get the chance to connect on these issues, I think they generally do connect positively. We all feel awash with the wave of development and data centers and solar farms and all these issues that are kind of there and of the moment. But I think part of the job I have, the job as the land trust, is to even say with the invasives or the data centers or whatever it is, just keep your head up, folks, and look around and think about the future and think about where you want things to go over time. And what I find is that when you really get to that conversation, even with a quote rapacious developer who we work with, a lot of developers, you get somewhere. You can get some consensus around some of these issues. So, and you do get some hope about where people wish the region would go. And so that's part of why we want to hopefully highlight the beautiful landscapes that do exist, and just continue to help others amplify the message. And the more we do that, the more people invest. You can't write people off, even when it's the third or fourth time they've, said no to you. So I've had people, I mean, not even my tenure, we've had people come 10 years later after some contact and say, hey, now I'm thinking of doing that thing. So that's kind of our job. And I would encourage us all to feel that way about the environment, because you can get depressed so quickly. And so, it's to me about the conversations in the end.
That is the message maybe we all needed to hear this morning. Thank you, Matt. Thank you for your work. And thank you for spending your Saturday morning with us.
Of course,
thank you all. Thank you all for joining us and for your great questions. And keep your head up, as Matt said, and have a great rest of your Saturday. Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you, Matt.
Sure. Have a good one. Thanks.